College hoops, welcome back to Beyond the Box Score. When you look at a college basketball slate, there are always a few games that jump out. Not because they're marquee matchups, but because the numbers tell a story long before the ball is tipped. And tonight's slate gives us exactly that. We've got two games where the stats, the trends, and the matchup dynamics paint a very clear picture if you know where to look. Let's break them both down the right way, take you inside the numbers, and get you locked in for Monday, December 8, 2025. This is Beyond the Box Score, and we don't just make picks, we explain why they matter. Starting with Lafayette versus Penn, this is one of those games where the moment you dive into the resumes of both teams, the difference in quality becomes obvious. Lafayette comes in at 3-7 straight up, and there is simply nothing convincing about what they've shown so far. They've struggled all season to establish any kind of consistency, and the road has been especially brutal for them. They're 0-4 straight up away from home, and if you watch them closely, you can see the same problems repeating: lack of size, difficulty creating efficient offense, and a defense that gets exploited in stretches because of that undersized lineup. Their recent results continue the trend. Yes, they're coming off a win against Mercyhurst, but you have to keep that in perspective. That matchup doesn't prove anything significant about where Lafayette stands against stronger DI competition. The game before that, they took a double-digit loss to Monmouth. Earlier in the season they scraped past Ball State, but even that can't be viewed as a quality win because Ball State simply isn't good. And when you look deeper into the resume, the concern grows: losses by 13 to Lemoyne, a 4-point loss to Stonehill, and a complete blowout loss against Cornell. It's one thing to lose games, but it's another thing to repeatedly lose to teams that aren't exactly national threats. That's the red flag with Lafayette. Their wins aren't impressive, and several of their losses raise bigger questions about their ceiling. Penn, on the other hand, tells a totally different story. They've faced tougher competition, and that matters a lot. Strength of schedule is a real factor with this team. They've beaten Drexel and St. Joe's, and while those aren't season-defining wins, they show Penn has handled solid mid-major opposition. More importantly, look at who they've played: Providence, Villanova, Hofstra, Merrimack, LaSalle. Teams with real structure, real talent, and real schemes that test you every possession. Penn has been challenged early, and that's sharpened them. They've already been forced to adapt to high-caliber defenses and strong offensive units, which gives them a far better evaluation baseline compared to a team like Lafayette. One of Penn's biggest strengths year after year is its perimeter shooting. This is a program that consistently produces efficient shooters and balanced spacing, and this season is no exception. They're drilling threes at a 41.6% clip, the sixth best mark in the entire nation. That's elite. That's the kind of shooting that can control the tempo of a game all by itself. Lafayette does shoot the three respectably at 36.6%, but Penn's efficiency is simply on another level. And when a team not only shoots well, but shoots often and confidently, it becomes a constant problem for undersized opponents. Speaking of size, this is another major separation point. Penn is the bigger team, and Lafayette's size disadvantage is extreme. Ranking 359th nationally in average height means they're undersized almost every single night, and that absolutely matters in a matchup against a team that already has better efficiency, better spacing, and better strength of schedule indicators. Penn can exploit mismatches both offensively and defensively simply by playing their natural style. They don't need to do anything special, they just need to be themselves. Combine Penn's stronger resume, elite shooting, size advantage, and Lafayette's road struggles, and the direction in this game becomes extremely clear. The pick has to be Penn, and laying the points is the only logical move based on how these teams stack up. Nothing Lafayette has shown on the road suggests they can hang with this level of shooting or physicality. The stronger schedule, the more consistent offense, the clear matchup edges, everything lines up toward the same conclusion. Now shifting into the next game, Mississippi Valley State traveling into Manhattan, Kansas to face Kansas State. And let's be honest, nobody wakes up on a Sunday expecting to break down Mississippi Valley State basketball, but that's the beauty of digging into the numbers. Even the games that look straightforward at first glance can have major betting angles once you look deeper. Mississippi Valley State has long been the punchline of Division I basketball. For years they've been at or near the bottom of nearly every advanced metric, and nothing this season changes that overall profile. But credit where it's due, they've actually covered several spreads this year. They went on a 5-game cover streak facing Hawaii, Utah Tech, Manhattan, and Cal Baptist. They even covered in a 120-84 loss to Texas A&M, where the deficit hit 36 points, which, amazingly, still allowed them to cover. That's the definition of being competitive only in the eyes of the spread. But here's where the reality hits. Kansas State is laying 30.5 points, and the line feels light. Yes, Kansas State is in a slump. They've dropped 4 straight, including an ugly 82-66 loss to Bowling Green, but that slump actually increases the chance that they show up angry, focused, and ready to unload on an overmatched opponent. Good teams respond to adversity, and facing Mississippi Valley State is exactly the kind of get-right opportunity a struggling Power 5 program usually capitalizes on. And when you stack the numbers side by side, it becomes even clearer. Mississippi Valley State ranks 365th on offense according to KenPom and 364th on defense. Out of 365 teams total, that puts them dead last or next to last in both major categories. It's impossible to sugarcoat that. It tells you everything you need to know about their difficulties scoring efficiently and their inability to string together defensive stops. And now they're stepping onto the floor in Manhattan, Kansas, one of the toughest environments in college basketball, against a team that desperately needs a confidence-restoring win. If Texas A&M can beat this team by 36, Kansas State should be able to generate a similar margin. The Wildcats have size, depth, and athleticism Mississippi Valley State simply can't match for more than a few minutes at a time. And as soon as the runs start, and they will, this game can get out of hand very quickly. So again, the play is straightforward, Kansas State laying the points. Mississippi Valley State has covered some games, but this matchup, this location, and this particular opponent coming off 4 straight losses make this a completely different scenario. The Wildcats should control from start to finish, and the spread is justified. Next we're looking at matchups where the pace, the shot profile, and the defensive cracks tell the entire story before tip-off. So let's start with Texas and Southern, a matchup where the numbers don't lie about what kind of game this could turn into. Texas comes into this battle after an 88-69 loss to Virginia in the ACC SEC Challenge, a game where their offensive rhythm never fully synced up. Meanwhile Southern rolls in off a 101-48 win over Louisiana Christian, improving to 4-4 on the season. Anyone who follows the SWAC closely knows Southern isn't just another mid-major punching bag. Year after year they're one of the more competitive programs in the conference. Sure, Prairie View A&M, Bethune-Cookman, and Alabama A&M, who are also 4-4, get talked about, and Prairie View sitting at 4-5 is respectable enough. Meanwhile you'll always have the basement programs like Arkansas Pine Bluff and Mississippi Valley State struggling to stay afloat. But in terms of analytics, Southern stands out. They're the highest-ranked SWAC team on KenPom, sitting right around the top 200, which is impressive for the conference. Southern didn't just build that ranking on cupcakes either. They've already taken on 3 top 100 KenPom teams. Yes, they're 0-3 in those games, but context matters. They covered against Marquette, they took Washington to double overtime, and they avoided getting blown out by Arkansas in the season opener. And Arkansas isn't the elite monster of old, but they're still a legitimate team physically and athletically. So the losses are understandable, but the takeaway is that Southern has competed in stretches far better than most SWAC teams typically do when stepping up. But here's where things get tricky. Across those 3 top 100 matchups, Southern allowed a combined 298 points, just under 100 points per game. And if there's any team that won't hesitate to capitalize on defensive breakdowns, it's Texas. When the Longhorns take the floor against inferior opponents, they rarely gear down. The only time they didn't completely unload was the 71-55 win over Kansas City. Outside of that, they hung 93, 97, and 99 points against Lafayette, Fairleigh Dickinson, and Rider. So another high-octane scoring night isn't far-fetched here. And even though Southern is overmatched physically, they're talented enough and fast enough to put their own points on the board, especially against a Texas team that's comfortable trading baskets when the game flow opens up. Looking at the styles, Texas appears like a problematic matchup for Southern. Southern hits threes at a solid percentage, but they don't shoot many of them. They'd rather work inside the arc, but Texas has a stout 2-point defense. The Longhorns also dominate the glass far more consistently, and that's another area where the gap widens. Southern is shooting 45.4% from 2, which falls into the bottom 50 nationally, and that's not ideal when facing a defense as disciplined as Texas. But even with the disadvantages, Texas tends to give up just enough scoring to weaker teams to help totals climb, and that's where the angle begins to form. Defensively, Southern has one massive flaw: perimeter defense. They're allowing opponents to shoot over 39% from 3, which is bottom 20 in the country. Combine that with being outside the top 300 in free throw rate allowed, and you have a dangerous formula when facing a Texas squad that gets to the line at a top 15 rate nationally. All signs point to points. Texas should be able to push into the 90-point range, and Southern, as long as they keep their pace and aggression, should chip in enough to keep things live. If you're hunting the side, Southern plus 22.5 is interesting because this feels like one of those games where the backdoor stays open. But the cleaner angle is the total, and the over 155 makes the most sense. With Texas's scoring profile, Southern's defensive limitations, and both teams' tendencies to run in stretches, the over is the stronger play. So the pick here is the over between Texas and Southern. Now let's move to Charleston Southern versus South Carolina State. Charleston Southern enters after a massive 124-63 win over subdivision opponent Warren Wilson, pushing them to 6-5 on the season. South Carolina State, on the other hand, sits at 0-9, coming off an 80-59 loss to Bethune-Cookman, and things in Orangeburg under Eric Martin just aren't working. Yes, they scheduled up in a couple of spots, but this isn't a team like Mississippi Valley State that intentionally stacks its schedule with near-impossible games just to pick up by-game checks. South Carolina State has played some winnable games and still gotten handled. They opened their season by losing to Louisville by 59 points. Then Missouri beat them by 32, hanging 98 points on them. Winthrop dropped 101 in a 22-point loss. Even in the games that weren't high-major opponents, they've lost by double digits repeatedly. 5 of those losses came to teams outside the KenPom top 200. Losses by 10+ to Samford, to North Carolina A&T, to Chattanooga in their only home game, and most recently to Bethune-Cookman by 21. They're getting blown out by everyone, not just good teams, and it's becoming impossible to justify giving them any benefit of the doubt. Charleston Southern is normally not the kind of team people love laying big numbers with, but this season there's a clear pattern. Every win they have is by double digits. Every loss has come away from home or on neutral floors. Their resume includes some understandable losses: Alabama A&M, Tennessee Martin, Lindenwood, but their defensive structure gives them the biggest advantage in this matchup. They don't force turnovers. In fact, they're literally the worst team in the nation at forcing turnovers. But even without pressure, their perimeter defense and two-point defense are legitimately strong. And that spells trouble for a South Carolina State offense that has been an absolute disaster. South Carolina State ranks 327th in turnover percentage, even though Charleston Southern can't really exploit that. But what is exploitable is SCSU's horrific shooting. They get 49.1% of their points from two-point range, but they're shooting just 40.7% inside the arc, which is 359th nationwide, bottom 5 level. That's where this game really tilts. Charleston Southern is also a heavy-volume three-point team, 13th nationally in three-point rate, with 44.9% of their points coming from three-point range. They get more production from deep than from two. South Carolina State's perimeter defense is mediocre at best, and that's enough for Charleston Southern to take full advantage. Charleston Southern's defense should smother South Carolina State's already inconsistent offense, and the Buccaneers have enough perimeter firepower to build separation early and maintain it late. Based on everything in the data, this feels like a 15-plus point win for Charleston Southern. So the play here is to lay the points with Charleston Southern. Now let's turn to New Orleans versus Incarnate Word, the lone conference matchup on the slate, Southland action on a Monday. New Orleans comes in at 2-7, dropping their conference opener 85-76 to Houston Christian, marking their 6th straight loss. Incarnate Word enters at 5-4, also coming off a loss, a 74-67 defeat to Nicholls, putting them at 1-1 in conference play. 3 of Incarnate Word's wins this season came against subdivision teams, and their only win over a Division I opponent besides that group was Southern Indiana, who sits 321st on KenPom. The stunner was the 71-67 win over MC, the conference favorite. Incarnate Word played MC tough twice last season, so seeing them finally break through isn't completely out of the blue, but it's still a massive confidence boost. Incarnate Word has faced tough competition as well. Colorado State, Indiana, and High Point, all top 100 KenPom teams. They lost all 3, and the defensive issues were noticeable, especially in stretches where opponents simply overpowered them. The loss to Nicholls looked like a classic letdown spot coming off the MC win, and that's understandable. But this matchup sets up as a bounce-back spot. New Orleans has not shown signs of stability. Yes, they have 2 impressive wins, beating TCU and Tulane, but every other game has exposed their defensive inconsistency. They've played 5 top 100 KenPom teams: LSU, Mississippi State in OT, Texas Tech, Memphis, and Houston Christian as conference play began. And even against a lower-tier opponent like Houston Christian, they allowed 85 points. When comparing these teams at their own level, Incarnate Word holds meaningful advantages. They're strong on the offensive glass, especially in conference play. New Orleans shot the ball well in their first conference game, both from 3 and from 2, but they still couldn't defend well enough to stay competitive. Incarnate Word doesn't rely heavily on perimeter shooting, which negates New Orleans' one true defensive strength, their 64th ranked three-point defense. Incarnate Word scores in the mid-range, at the rim, and at the foul line, and that's where they match up favorably. Incarnate Word also takes care of the basketball significantly better, and both teams allow a high free throw rate. But Incarnate Word gets to the line at a higher rate, rebounds better, and historically has performed well in this matchup, winning 4 of the last 5 meetings. Trends from familiar conference matchups often carry over more than people realize, just like how they played MC tight twice last season and then upset them this year. Putting it all together, Incarnate Word simply looks like the better overall team with the more reliable metrics. Instead of laying the small spread and paying extra juice, the smarter angle is taking Incarnate Word on the moneyline. That's the pick for this matchup. And that wraps up this breakdown. If you're rocking with Beyond the Box Score, make sure you stay locked in. Every day we're breaking down matchups with nothing but the numbers, the angles, and the truth behind the scoreboard. Drop your picks in the comments and let me know where you're leaning. Until next time, this is Beyond the Box Score, where the stats meet the story.